welcome everybody, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You're listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks here on 12radio.com and simulcasting on YouTube channel of the same name as the show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. And we are changing the way we listen to the world in 2026. This is January 6th, and thank you so much for being here. This is our first show of the year. And on today's show, we, of course, are going to look ahead to the week and see what's going on. But we're going to use it as kind of an opportunity to, I love to teach about things. This week has tons of potential, an opportunity, because we have 4 planets in the very purposeful sign of Capricorn. Now, 3 of those planets, the Sun, Venus, and Mars, are all within 1 degree of each other, which means in astrological speak, they are conjunct. They're combining forces. So as I was looking at the show, I thought, yeah, we can just go ahead and talk about, hey, what's likely to happen with all those 3 planets, really mixing it up and combining their energies. But I thought, but you know what? I want to talk a little bit about those relationships, which we call aspects in astrology. Because here again, you're listening to this and you're going, ooh, in my chart, I have a couple of planets sitting next door to each other too. And so trying to kind of figure out what does that mean and how does it likely manifest? So I really have 3 goals: to talk about aspects, which are those relationships, and to give you an idea of how they're likely to manifest. Because here again, they have definitions. I mean, over thousands of years, people have watched them, and they've got ideas about how and what happens when different planets get together in those relationships, specifically conjunctions. But I also want you to gain an appreciation that everything is neutral. Everything in life is neutral until we give it meaning. So here again, the difference between really being an astrologer and cookbook astrology is being able to take those observations, those definitions, and then watch and observe and see, well, how does it really happen? What did I see going on in my life or in the world at that time? So hopefully I won't just totally confuse you. And I will admit, once I really get into something, I came up with about notes for about 2 hours, maybe 2.5. So then I'm sitting here late last night going, okay, how do we cut this down? How do we get it to just something that's really specific and easy to remember and to understand? So I'm going to do my best to do that. And so that's what you're going to hear today. You're going to hear some stuff about aspects. You're going to hear some things about what's likely to happen this week because of those conjunctions. And also, I want you to walk away with that appreciation that everything is neutral. You give it meaning. So we'll see how it manifests for various people. And, hopefully you'll just pay attention this week and see, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I observing? What does this feel like to me? What is the interpretation that I want to give to it? Now, before we get started, though, I do want to remind you all, we are doing a 2026 prediction show. The radio hosts and advisors at 12listen.com. That's going to be this Friday, which is January 9th. It is going to be broadcast on 12radio.com and also on Serena's. She is the host, she is the guide, she's the person who's coordinating the whole thing. It's going to be on her YouTube channel. So it's going to be on youtube.com/at Life Journeys with Serena. And many of you already listened to her show, so you probably have it plugged into your YouTube. But if you don't, that's where you'll find it. It's all going to be audio. There will be no video. And so you can listen either place, YouTube, or you can go to 12radio.com. There are going to be 10 people involved. Now, each person is going to get about 15 minutes to put in their 2 cents about 2026. It's going to start at 9 a.m., there again, Friday morning, 9 a.m., that's Pacific time, and it'll go till about 11. Then there will be a break, and it'll start up again at 1:30 and probably go to about 3:15, because to accommodate 10 people, we knew it would be like a long session if everybody did that, all in a row. So I hope you'll tune in on Friday, and if you can't tune in on Friday, I hope that you will listen to it at some other point, because of course it's going to be archived. So before we get started, though, I do want to shout out and say, hey, thanks to everybody who is coming into the chat room today over on YouTube. Hey, Donna, it's good to see you, and Lynn. And of course, I'm sure James is, there's lots of people, and I'm probably not going to be able to, mention everybody's name, but Quelly and Pamela, thank you so much. And I guess I better just get going, or we're not going to get through any of these pages. But everybody, thank you, and Happy New Year, and thanks for being here today. All right, so here, as we look at this cosmic dance, we're going to start with those kind of a brief primer on those aspects. So that's what we call them in astrology. When there's a relationship between planets, or a relationship between a planet and maybe a house, that kind of thing, we call them aspects. And here again, nothing is all good or all bad. We give them the meanings. And a lot of times those meanings, and not just a lot of time, every time, those meanings have to do with the planets themselves and the kind of energy, the kind of characteristics that they bring to the situation. Just like a regular relationship. Every marriage is not the same. Every relationship is not the same. Every sibling reaction or interaction is not the same. It depends on the people involved. So same thing with aspects. It depends on the planets, but it also is colored or mediated by the signs that those planets are in. So think about it that way too. So when we talk about aspects, most of the time we're talking about between planets, but sometimes we're literally talking about an aspect between house cusps, that kind of thing, or a planet and a house cusp. Like I might say, hey, did you notice Uranus is sitting right on your second house cusp? Well, that's a relationship. It's conjunct. So when you think about this, think about it's really a circle, right? All those degrees, 360 degrees sitting in a circle. So when we look at aspects, we basically divide that circle into pieces. And the aspects that you hear the most often, I think, if you listen to this show, if you read my article in Mark's Power Peak, which I hope that you do, we talk about conjunctions, which means that planets are really close together. They're within 0 to 7 degrees. We talk about sextiles, which means they're basically two signs apart, but very compatible. We talk about squares that are 90 degrees. That's where there's a challenge usually involved, an adjustment that has to be made. We talk about trines when planets are 120 degrees apart. And there again, that means they're in the same element, at least usually. They're in the same, so they're all fire, they're all water. They get along. We also talk about oppositions, which means they're opposite each other, but they're in elements that are compatible, but they're very different. They're polar opposites. So those are the ones that you hear most often. But of course, you'll hear me talk about those in conjuncts. And, if you wanted to, you could just keep subdividing all of those. Like sometimes I hear people talk about semi-sextile, semi-squares, they want to divide this into many, 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 many little pieces. Sometimes you'll hear about a quintile, which is 72 degrees apart. But today we really are going to focus on the conjunction and oppositions because that's what's going on this week. So that's where we're going to go. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information. But here again, if you walk away with nothing else, please walk away with the idea that even though it's tempting, avoid thinking of aspects as good or bad. Because there again, even the most challenging things that happen to us in our lives tend to be some of the greatest lessons that we learn. So there again, was it bad? Was it really bad to have that challenge? How many times in retrospect do we look at something and say, wow, that was maybe not the best thing that ever happened to me, but boy, it sure was useful. And here's one other example I want to give to you that, especially when I first started studying astrology, all the books are saying how wonderful trines are. That's that 120 degrees where the planets are in some, the same element. And so I thought, oh yeah, I want trines in my chart, or when I look at aspects, I want to see that. I want to see when those transiting planets are going around, they're creating trines, because trines are traditionally considered to be beneficial. They're considered to be positive because the energy flows. They support each other. It's harmonizing. However, here's the example I'm going to give you. Trine energy, or that easy flow, can also kind of it can be too much. The flip side of it is we can become stagnated or lazy or just have a lack of motivation or not have very much self-awareness. And one of the great lessons for me is, as I was looking at all these different charts over the years, to see that there were people that had all these trines. And of course, it's tempting to go, oh, how lucky are they? But you know what? I've seen those trines predominate in the charts of people that we would consider generally social misfits or sociopaths and even serial killers. Like, for instance, this is the example I'm going to give you. Now, here again, we're not talking about trines this week. We're talking about conjunctions. But Ted Bundy, he was the one that, it was a wake up and smell the coffee moment, because in his chart, he has Mars, the planet of power and initiation, personal will. He has it trine Saturn, which is also the power broker, of the zodiac. So he has Mars and Sag trine Saturn and Pluto in Leo in the 12th house. Now, of course, we could do a whole show on his chart. But, and I'm assuming you all know who Ted Bundy was. He was a young man who was considered very charming. People loved him, but he ended up, they think he killed somewhere between 20 and 30 young women. He would kidnap them and kill them. And so, like I said, we could do a whole show or more just on his chart. But Mars trine Saturn would also indicate that for him, he just thought he had the power. He thought he had the authority. Nobody could tell him what to do. Now, he also, by the way, had Mars conjunct his South Node. And the South Node to me is the past. It's what we're trying to move away from. And that would, when I see that, that almost automatically makes me think that he wasn't using this particular lifetime to learn something new. Maybe, if you believe in past lives, maybe he was falling back on old bad behavior. I don't know. But moving away from him, I want to do a contrast. And that is, who also has Mars trine Pluto in exactly the same sign? Mars and Sag trine Pluto in Leo? Benjamin Franklin. And another person who has that trine in a different sign? Albert Einstein. And by the way, Einstein has Mars conjunct the North Node, meaning the future, where he's trying to move in this lifetime. So that's an example of, don't be talking about those trines being so positive. We can talk about him being relatively positive with Albert Einstein and Benjamin Franklin, but there's a good possibility it didn't work in his favor with Ted Bundy. And there again, I don't want you to also think that's the only thing in his chart. He's got lots of interesting, complicated things in his chart, as do most of us. But try not to make these just all out, declarations of whether or not aspects are good or bad, because that's not what you're going to find to be true for the most part. Now, there's a whole lot more that we could talk about with those aspects, but that's what I mostly wanted to get across today, is that, we're, like I said, let's just jump into those conjunctions. And maybe someday, I taught a class once on aspects, maybe I'll do that again. I probably should think in 2026 of teaching some classes for people who really want to go much, much deeper with astrology. So consider these aspects. Think about, here again, I'm going to repeat, think about the planet involved. What does it mean? What is its characteristics? What sign is it in? So how is it acting? What are the tools that it's using? And use your intuition when it comes to understanding how it's likely to manifest. So this week, we're mostly looking at those conjunctions, but we not only have Sun, Venus, and Mars, they're literally sitting within 1 degree of each other, right there in the middle of Capricorn. But what's going to happen is by Friday, all 3 of those are going to start opposing Jupiter, because Jupiter, that planet of increase and expansion, is sitting over in Cancer, the opposite sign. So those are going to be oppositions that we're going to be dealing with. And by the way, that will start going into the next week as well. And speaking of the week after that, of course, those 3 planets, as they continue to travel relatively close together, they're gonna meet up and make aspects with some other planets as well. And so it almost becomes this repetition of, okay, Venus does it, Mars does it, Sun does it, and then start all over again with a different planet. So that's why this is a fascinating time to just observe and watch aspects. And by the way, don't want to leave without saying this. I do hope that you will read Mark's Power Peak, because it does. If you read my column, you will see what's going on every single day. But the other thing is, as much as we have some great energy at the beginning of this week, come this weekend, all three of those Capricorn planets are not only going to be opposing Jupiter, but they're also going to square the Libra moon. Because the moon, which moves relatively quickly, it's going to be in Libra. And then they're all going to square Chiron and Aries. So what we've got going on Saturday is what we call a grand cross or a grand square. So if you feel like there are lots of moving pieces and lots of stuff going on, that's exactly what's happening with that grand square. And there again, it can be difficult to, you can't just say, oh, that must be the opposition of Jupiter. Oh, that must be the moon. It's a combined effort. It's one big picture with lots of moving parts, but it can be very exhausting. So you might plan accordingly and just know that there's going to be lots of kind of energy, and a lot of it is going to be either grating or annoying, or it could just be difficult to deal with. Okay, so let's get to those conjunctions. Once again, we usually talk about conjunctions, meaning the planets are 0 to 7 degrees apart. Now, when I said they're usually in the same sign, but not always, it's because we're talking about how far away they are from each other. So if a planet is sitting at 29 degrees, like for instance, we've got Neptune sitting at 29 Pisces, ready to go into Aries. But when a planet is sitting at 0 Aries, they're sitting right next door to each other. So sometimes when you hear people talk about a conjunction, the planets will actually be in different signs. Okay, now that makes it a little trickier because they're not manifesting exactly the same way, but they're still combining their forces. They're bringing their energies together. And there again, think of two people, commingling their energy. They're joining, they're doing something cooperatively, or at least we hope they are. They're team players, but they can also be really competitive. So there again, think about your own life and the relationships that you have. When you do something with some people, it may feel like a real cooperative effort. And then other people, it may feel like it's a real competition. But you're in it together, right? For whatever reason. Well, that's what we've got with conjunctions. So, and think about Capricorn. All these planets are manifesting through this very driven kind of energy of Capricorn, very organized, very disciplined. It always wants to have a purpose. Capricorn can also be somewhat of a loner, likes to accomplish things on its own. So that automatically makes it a little bit of like, okay, I'm going to join with you, but I have my own agenda here. And I would say Capricorn values teamwork very much, but Capricorn likes to be at the top of the pyramid. They like to be the boss. They like to be the manager or the director. Because once again, they're saying, I want to do it my way. I have a purpose. If you join me in my purpose, great. But if you don't, I'm probably just going to go ahead and do what I think is the best thing to do. So in some ways, I think Capricorn makes for a great manager and team leader. But once again, they have their own thing that they're going for. They want to agree with what the real goal is. They want to have a goal. And they're motivated if there's something to achieve, especially if it has to do with status or reputation. They want to achieve something. So what we've got going on is today, the sun is conjunct Venus. So here again, what is the sun? It's ego. It's our individuality, the way we see ourselves. Venus, what we value and what we find attractive. So generally, this is considered to be a very positive influence. And what kind of happens, it can be a kind and gentle, a warm-hearted energy. And here again, if you look at people that have this in their chart, you may see some of these things. They may be very charming. They may be very artistic because once again, their ego is being influenced by all of those attributes of Venus. They may be very personally magnetic. Maybe they tend to be lucky or blessed, or, always, I'm guided by angels or the divine. A lot of times they're good looking. They're romantic. They value harmony and peace and social interaction. So what does that happen for us today? We're kind of in that mindset. We're kind of wanting those things. But here again with Capricorn, it could be, what is the purpose for it? So it might be in a business relationship. It might be to put we want to be social, or we want to, get together with people because we want to do a business project or something. Now, the weakness, of course, when we put the Sun and Venus together is that, and this almost goes back to the trines I was talking about. Sometimes we can be a little bit passive or lazy because we just want to attract something to us. Now, here's another thing, and I'm not going to talk about it much, but I know you hear Mo Abdelbaki talk about it a lot, which is the idea that when a planet is really, really, really close to the sun, they call it combust. And it's as if the sun is so strong, it can burn some of the qualities, of that other planet. So sometimes you'll talk about that. And like I said, that's more of a Mo thing. He talks more about that than I do, but it is something to think about. Does Venus really have all of her good qualities? Does she have everything that is usually available to her when she's in the presence of the sun, which is really the biggest planet of the entire universe, the strongest one? He's center stage. So just something to think about. I mean, that's a little caveat about how that energy comes to play. Now, tomorrow, Venus is conjunct Mars. Now, by the way, all these planets, when I use that word conjunct, they're all conjunct this week. They're all within 1-2 degrees. But when I say Venus is conjunct the sun, I'm talking about they're exactly at the same astrological point. So Wednesday, tomorrow, Venus is exactly at the same astrological point as Mars. So there again, generically, yeah, they're conjunct all week, but they're perfect on a particular day. That's Venus and Mars are conjunct tomorrow. They're perfect. So once again, Venus attracts, but Mars, I consider Mars her cosmic soulmate because she attracts and he goes out and gets what he wants. So this is kind of the classic yin yang thing. It's like one pulls in and the other one grabs it. It works very well together. One's introverted, one's extroverted. So when we get those two together, usually what we're looking at is passion. There can be sexiness, enthusiasm, usually. They're driven by desire. They're the ultimate romantic. It's very concerned with love life and partnership. There again, there's usually charm because of Venus and fascination because of Venus. Very charismatic. But once you've got that Mars energy, when you put those two together, there's this sense of, I want to bring people my way. I want to be the boss. I want things to go the way I want them to go. It can be very fun-loving energy, but we also may enjoy fighting. Now, I know that sounds weird, but it's this, when you get Venus and Mars, there's this sense, especially with Mars. Remember, Mars likes action. He doesn't like things to be monotonous or boring or routine. So have you ever known those couples that, it's almost like they love to fight so that they can, make up? It's a love-hate kind of thing. They want some excitement. And too much of the same thing seems boring. So it is kind of, I shouldn't use the word polar opposite because I want you to think about that in terms of oppositions. But in this sense, Venus and Mars are very different energy. They're very compatible, but they don't want to be boring. So there is that little bit of tension that keeps everything exciting. So, but what does this do for today and for tomorrow? It means that there could be lots of social interactions or lots of interesting interactions. Somebody might come into your life. Somebody may it just seems like it's destined, love at first sight. Because here again, that's another thing that happens when Venus and Mars are together. We tend to jump into situations or jump into relationships. It just almost seems too good to be true. I kind of think about King Minos and the bull, that Taurus story of, just the physical beauty. And I just have to have this. And it doesn't matter if I promised Neptune I'd give this bull back to him. I'm not going to. I want to keep this. I love this. I want this. I desire this. And I'm not giving it back. So that's what we get with Venus and Mars, that there's love, there's passion, there's excitement, and that's it. We kind of like the conflict and the fighting, at least because it's sparring is what it is. So when I look at midweek, these are kind of the take-home messages, I think. Generally, these are positive interactions that we see over the next couple of days because the Sun and Venus, they're trying to be besties, as are Venus and Mars. But because they're sharing that same astrological space. But we see them in a serious-minded sign, Capricorn. And truthfully, Capricorn usually isn't associated with charm and luck and personal magnetism. But it could be, mediated. It could be modified because of these two planets coming together. But it also feels like sometimes it just makes everything look a little sweeter. Makes things look a little gentler, more romantic, or more hopeful when we have the Sun and Venus together or we have Venus and Mars together. It's almost like we're under this little spell. I wouldn't call it a fairy tale, but we might just feel a little bit more optimistic than we have in the past, like anything is possible. It is an opportunity to build strength and to build allies, whether that's a romantic liaison or whether it's friendship or it's doing something in business. We have the opportunity to build allies, to network, to attract love and romance and money and resources and other what I consider positive life experiences. Now, here's another little caveat that's going to help. The moon is going to move into Virgo, and that is going to happen this afternoon. But what's good about that is Virgo is another earth sign like Capricorn. So now we've got the moon in a supporting role. It's fortifying all this energy that's going on in Capricorn. So it really helps, I think. It just pulls things together. So I think that for the most part, social plans go pretty well. A romantic rendezvous, maybe goes pretty well. It's just a good time to move into that Venus energy and try to stay away from almost, I'd say purposely, avoid the ugly stuff, strident discussions or violent movies. Find ways to spoil yourself. Now, here's another thing. I guess my final thoughts is as we look at this, I recognize a lot of people are in some, what I consider serious situations. And they might even be listening to this going, oh yeah, like rosy glow. I see a real rosy glow in my life, right? But I think that this is a time that we can be more optimistic and hopeful than usual. But one of the ways we do that is when we let go of that idea about this is just what I can get or do for myself. And this is a good time to think about other people, what they're feeling, they're thinking, or they're going through. Now, we're not going to fix it. We're not, we don't have a lot of control over it. But when we can think about other people and it kind of remove ourselves from being like the priority, in a positive way. I'm not talking about just, totally pushing everything that, is important to you to the side. But I'm thinking sometimes when we're a lucky charm for somebody else, when we can sort of be that person who makes somebody else's life easier. And maybe we're not even intending it. Maybe we're just saying, you know what, today I'm going to think about other people. To be the lucky charm or unexpected blessing for somebody else, you can't help but plant seeds for your own luck and success. So that's the other thing I'd say. Don't look at these and go, yeah, I'm going to use that Venus and Sun, or I'm going to use Venus and Mars, and I'm going to get what I want. The more maybe we can think about shared interests, or can I be a blessing for somebody else today? And there again, don't put a lot of rational thought into this. How am I going to do it? Just say, you know what? I want to be available. I want to do kind of some of these conjunctions, some of these merging energies. I just want to be there and stand up with somebody else. Then you know what? We're really planting seeds for our own success, for our own luck. All right. So think about it that way. And especially if you're not in a good place at this point, then maybe one of the ways you get out of that or change your focus is to think about somebody else. You're not the only person who's there. We share. We have a joint mind. We share it. And yeah, sometimes things are really going well for us and sometimes they're not, at least in the world. But we can recognize that we're not really different or separated from other people. We just have different agendas sometimes. So I'm not going to give you any quotes today until the end of the show, but people with Sun conjunct Venus, some of those people, like one is Dolly Parton. She's got it in Capricorn, pretty close. Coco Chanel has it in Leo. That makes sense, doesn't it? Oprah Winfrey, she has both planets, both Sun and Venus at 8 Aquarius. Now that makes sense to me too, because look at what she does. She lights the way for other people. She's progressive. Leonardo DiCaprio. Now I think of him because he's got it very close, 18 and 19 degrees Scorpio. And so it's a very sexual energy. It's a very attractive and sexual energy, and maybe a little mysterious, not quite sure what's going on there, So those are people with Sun conjunct Venus. There's also people, of course, that have Venus conjunct Mars. Now, this may surprise you. The first person on my list, Adolf Hitler. And of course you go, what? Venus conjunct Mars? Well, of course, because what he wanted, he combined with his personal will. Both of those planets were sitting at 16 Taurus. Now, interestingly enough, he also had Sun in Taurus conjunct Mercury. So here again, when we have talked about the Sun and Mercury coming together, and a person being a very, very powerful speaker, think about Adolf Hitler. He had an incredible ability to move people, to motivate people. Now, technically, his Sun was in Taurus, but right next door to Mercury and Aries. So that was his combination. Gandhi had Venus and Mars at 16 and 18 Scorpio. Betty Davis had Mars at 29 Taurus and Venus in the first 0 degree of Gemini. And Betty Davis just seems perfect there too, a woman of many talents, but strong will with Venus conjunct Mars. Uma Thurman has it in Gemini with 3 degrees apart. So those are just some examples of people, and there's lots of them. And by the way, because Mercury and Venus stay relatively close to the Sun, it's not that unusual to find people with the Sun and Venus together, or with the Sun and Venus and Mercury together, because those 3 kind of travel together, right? Now, as we get towards the end of the week, Friday, that's when the Sun and Mars are perfectly conjunct, sitting at exactly the same degree. So now this is a different kind of energy, because now we've got, to me, both Sun and Mars are manifestations of ego. And you add that Mars, it's my personal will. What do I want? So that energy is strong and energetic and assertive and adventurous, courageous, competitive, hardworking. So if you notice in the Power Peak, I said, this is a day to maybe go your own way, to work on something you want to work on, because this can be a dominating energy. It can be very sexual as well. But it's like these people want to go after something in a big way. And here again, when I say these people, I'm talking about people born with those planets together, but we're under the influence on Friday. Very much. We put our identity together with our personal will. What do I want? What do I want to accomplish? It can be high energy. And think about it, when you just really need some kind of a physical outlet in your life, that's what the Sun and Mars are when they get together. So of course, As much as it's hardworking and competitive, it can also be hot-tempered and argumentative. We like to have our way, and we may even push so hard that we'll intimidate or manipulate other people to get what we want. It's an energy that's often considered selfish or subjective. We're impatient. But here again, if you're one of those people and you go, I just need my exercise. I need to go out and walk. I need to hike. I need to swim. I need to go do something. That is a day when you're really going to notice that. And it's really helpful if you can plan ahead and if you can pace yourself, because that's what we need to do. So there again, just be aware. That's a time to really get, something done. So if you have something physical on your list, like, hey, I need to put all that Christmas stuff away. I need to clean the garage. I need to go, whatever it is, something physical, Friday's probably the day to start thinking about that. Now, I'm going to give you an example. People with Sun conjunct Mars, Elizabeth Taylor, Steven Spielberg, Nicolas Cage, Grace Kelly. Now that one, in a sense, was a little surprising to me, but not really. Just going after what you want. Hers was in Scorpio. Liberace and Shirley MacLaine. They're all examples of people who had Sun conjunct Mars. Now the other thing going on Friday, though, and here again, this is where, how do you separate these out? Venus on Friday is the first planet to make an opposition with Jupiter. And there again, I want you to realize this stuff is actually going on all week, because in many ways, once planets get to be within, about 7 degrees of each other, we've got that going on. Well, but when I say Venus is opposite Jupiter on Friday, I'm saying that's when it's perfect. But it's already been building all week long and maybe even before. Now, oppositions, what happens when things are opposite? That means they're 180 degrees apart. They're 6 signs apart. But remember, those signs are compatible. So it's earth and water, or fire and air. There's a compatibility there. So in this case, we've got earth and water because we've got Capricorn, which is earth, and we've got Cancer, which is water. But they're still polar opposites. They're going after similar things, but with different expressions. And sometimes what we see in oppositions is what psychologists would call projection. Because I see in you something I'm probably not recognizing in myself. So I'm going, you do that. You're the one who does that, when the truth is it's what I want, and I'm spending time with you because you're willing to kind of act it out with me, right? Or for me. So oppositions often require a bit of negotiation and integration, even though they're considered one of the challenging aspects. But on the other hand, they're considered one of the easiest of the challenging aspects, because there again, it's a negotiation. Let's figure out how we can both get what we want. So what is Jupiter about? Jupiter's about increase and expansion and optimism. So the strengths, when you put Jupiter and Venus in opposition to each other, usually what you get is a very enthusiastic response. It's very spirited. Generally, it's good-natured and warm-hearted. Love to share information or spiritual knowledge. Loves to be in love. Enjoys and thrives attention. So, you can see this. It's kind of like this sparring back and forth between Venus and Jupiter. But what happens when it kind of goes overboard? Or what is the shadow side? That's where you start to see laziness or weakness, or kind of this offing, this off thing with pacing. That's what you'll see with Mars too. It's like, I'm on or I'm off, and maybe wanting to just be a little too indulgent, because here again, Venus associated with sugar, associated with sweets, associated with what we want, with appetites. And so sometimes we can just let our personal appetites rule. And that's all of our appetites, our desires. We want those physical comforts and sensual pleasures. And what we need is a little discipline. Now, hopefully with Capricorn and all those planets in Capricorn, discipline is Capricorn's middle name. So hopefully we can use a little discipline to actually get what we want, because that's a wonderful energy to have Venus in opposition to Jupiter. unless we just kind of spend it away. We just let it dissipate because we can't quite control it or we can't quite channel it. So, speaking of spending, we can become spendthrifts, just not being very conscious of the way we are spending money or time or our resources. So we might start seeing that as a Friday night. Now, on Saturday is when we start seeing the sun in opposition to Jupiter. So here again, we see some very similar things because, it can be a very kind, sympathetic energy, people with good intentions. We're charming and magnetic and charismatic, and we're attracting all kinds of luck and opportunities. That's what we want to happen. But of course, what happens when it goes over into the shadow side? Well, we can get into real exaggeration, the theatrics, the drama, and talk about being overly indulgent, because we're really self-confident. We think we know everything and how to do everything. We can sometimes feel entitled. Like we really expect people to treat us, in an entitled way. We expect deferential treatment. And we may not follow through because once again, we're bigger than life. When the sun is opposite Jupiter, bigger than life. And so somehow this is all going to work out even if we don't put any effort into it. So, here again, I want you to recognize these are some of the manifestations, but there's positive and shadows at the same time. Now, of course, then as we keep moving on Saturday, Mars opposite Jupiter. And those are pretty darn close together, Sun and Mars opposite Jupiter, happening, I think, in the early morning hours on Saturday. So what happens there? Well, talk about that energy. It's back. Energy, activity, excelling in physical pursuits and sports, being fearless, going with extreme energy, intense about our beliefs. Because remember, Jupiter rules Sag. So that's about philosophy and spirituality and religion and all kinds of things, how we think life works, what makes everything tick. But it's energy that tends to be outward directed. So the weakness is we can become very extreme. We can go back and forth between laziness and high energy. There's a lack of balance and moderation. Possibly we're taking unnecessary risks. And it's very likely we're showing poor judgment because we're just impatient. That Mars working against Jupiter, and just pulling back and forth. It's very high energy. But now people with Mars opposite Jupiter include Gandhi. Now, a few people that I was interested to see this, if you remember Betty Friedan and Gertrude Stein, very strong women, kind of working outside the typical boundaries of what's acceptable. George Eliot, who is an author, also a woman using a man's name. LL Cool J. Now, you may know him. He's an actor on TV, but he was originally a rapper, and I think still is. But then there's Ron Howard, who also has Mars opposite Jupiter. Opposite Jupiter. So there's lots of ways that all this energy manifests. And, it's pretty exciting. It truly is. But what here again, kind of some wrap up thoughts about what's going on. We've got some really positive energy midweek, Tuesday through Thursday. We've got Venus, mixing it up with the sun and with Mars. That's relatively positive. We've got that Virgo moon that's totally supporting that Capricorn energy. So we've got some good things, going on. Once we start getting to Friday, is when we start there's high energy on Friday, but here again, you may have to really start, taking it down a notch, or at least recognize that other people may not be totally on board with what you're doing. And why? Because that's when we start seeing those oppositions with Jupiter. Jupiter's in Cancer, the sign of family, the sign of tribe, doing things for the better, for the better good, so to speak. But the sun conjunct Mars is going, hey, but I want to get done what I want to get done. So there's going to be a little tension going back and forth. But if at all possible, really think, can you use use Friday, maybe even Saturday? Can you start just scheduling things that where it's not dependent on having these really intricate interactions with other people? Because it's likely there's going to be a few bumps and bruises. Now, that's especially true on Saturday, because Saturday, not only do we have all those planets in Capricorn who are saying, you know what, I don't mind being a loner, I don't mind doing it my own way, but those same planets are opposing Jupiter in Cancer, the sign of family, and they're also squaring. That's when the moon moves into Libra. We've got a moon in Libra, which is the sign of partnership, of course. And, for the most part, we say, oh, well, if it's in Libra, I want everything to be smooth sailing. I want everything to be peaceful and sweet. And I want to think about partnership. But you know what? The one thing about Libra that I think sometimes people forget is that whole idea of equality also has to do with justice. I want there to be balance. I want there to be harmony. And it may take justice to get balance back into a situation. And so Libra sitting there isn't just this sweet, I'll do anything you want. That Libra moon is saying, hey, I want some justice. We need equality and unity, and, we need to figure something out because the harmony maybe has been possibly upset, and maybe because of other things going on this week. So those Capricorn planets, they're squaring that moon also. They're challenging it. Something's got to give. They are also squaring Chiron, which is the wounded healer. Now, that also means, by the way, that Jupiter's squaring the moon and Jupiter is squaring Chiron. So this is what we call a grand square, a grand cross, and literally think of it like a square. And there are planets in each corner. And so some of them are opposing each other and some of them are squaring each other. So when you start dividing it up, you've got all these individual little pieces, but most of them are creating some kind of a little tension that says, ooh, this needs to be either tightened or this needs to be loosened somewhere in my life. And so truthfully, Saturday and Sunday could end up just being a little stressful, especially if we haven't planned for it. But the other thing is, just like when I said, an adjustment needs to be made, and maybe something needs to be tightened and something else needs to be loosened. There is no automatic, this is how you're going to manifest this, or this is how you're going to do this. It's not automatic. So you need to stay awake. You need to stay aware. Listen to your feelings. But you know what? When you're feeling like, okay, I'm just overwhelmed, there's too much going on, well, then know yourself. Take a break. Build those moments where you can just kind of take a breath. Or, if you're a person who likes to meditate, or maybe, I know sometimes I just step out into the yard and take a few breaths. I just need to slow down for a minute. I need to be aware of my pace. I need to be aware that I've gotten off balance or that I'm feeling overwhelmed, and just take a breath. Take responsibility for it. And oftentimes we don't have a couple of hours to just run away. I'd like to sometimes, but we don't often have that. So just recognize that Saturday, starting Friday, we're wanting to do some things on our own. Saturday, the tension could build. Sunday, it's going to get a little bit better. But even as we go into next week, what we're going to really find is those same Capricorn planets are going to start mixing it up with Chiron, with Saturn, with Neptune, and with Uranus. Now, of course, Saturn and Neptune, they're in Pisces, so those are going to be very positive, or could be very positive connections. Same thing with Uranus, it's sitting in an Earth sign. So it's not that those are going to be bad, but I want you to know that that same trio is going to start making all those connections. Now, another thing that's going to happen by the end of next week, Saturday, January 17th, Venus is the first of those planets to go, okay, I'm out of here. She's the fastest moving. So she's going to move into Aquarius on January 17th. So we're, the rest of those will still be in Capricorn, but we're going to see a little break there. It's going to be new energy. Then we're actually going to have a new moon in Capricorn, kind of maybe the last hurrah in Capricorn on Sunday, January 18th. So we'll have a new moon. So once again, you want to learn astrology, pay attention to what's going on. How does it feel? How does this look? And we may not know, like some people would go, see, yeah, you're crazy. Like, every once in a while I'll be reading a chart or even a tarot card or something, and somebody else will go, how do you ever derive that interpretation? And all I can say is from 40 years of experience and also using intuition. I'm not quite sure. I just know as all these things come together, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. So I'm encouraging you to do the same thing. Know the rules, know the observations, what you would expect, but then listen to your own intuition. What does it say to you? What's happening for you? So as we close the show today, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited about 2026. I hope to talk to you on Friday. I'm going to kick off that show with Serena, by the way. So I'm going to be on at 9 a.m. Pacific time on Friday for 15 minutes of, I guess that's 15 minutes of fame, right? So I'm going to kick off that show. We're going to be talking about 2026. So thanks for being here. I look forward to another wonderful year with you all. And thanks for coming into the chat room. I love listening to your comments. And I hope today that you will stay, keep tuned to 12radio.com and also to YouTube, because coming up next is Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Thank you very much to Serena for being our producer today and for volunteering to coordinate that prediction show that we're doing on Friday. So I'm going to leave you with one quote today, and I chose Gandhi because he has Venus and Mars conjunct, which is one of the things we've got going on this week. It's conjunct in Scorpio, but he also has both Venus and Mars opposite Jupiter in Taurus. So I thought he represents a lot of the energy we've got going on this week, and he's a positive role model. So, I pulled so many quotes and I couldn't really decide which one to use, but this is where we're going to go. Our greatest ability as humans is not to change the world, but to change ourselves. So this is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on 12listen.com. Please feel free to request a scheduled call on a day and a time that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks, and we are on 12radio.com and streaming on YouTube, where we are changing the way we listen to the world in 2026.